So my name is Mohamad Tassabehji. I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm actually a civil engineer, but today I'm going to be talking about architecture in Lebanon and the Lebanese house during the 18th and the 19th century. So the book that I'm going to be talking to you guys about, that's a picture of the cover of the book. I have it right here with me. And there's a link to buy it on Amazon if you'd like to after this fabulous presentation. So the book was written by a gentleman called Friedrich Ragette. He was an Austrian architect, and he taught architecture at AUB, the American University of Beirut. So he taught at AUB since 1964. The book was published in 1974, so it is dated. But the nice thing about it is they basically chronicle and capture a lot of Lebanese architecture back in the day that we've lost since then. Ironically, he wrote the book as a call to arms. He was basically trying to wake the Lebanese up and let them know that they had awesome architecture and it should be preserved. And he was hoping this would inspire them. This was 56 years ago, and we've lost a lot since then. But ironically, that's why it started. So the book's divided into several sections. I won't be able to tell you guys about all of them today, but the first two are what I'm going to focus on. So the author starts off talking about factors that influence architecture in Lebanon, what makes it uniquely Lebanese. Then he talks about the different types of houses and as they evolve. Again, this is the 18th and the 19th century, so we don't talk about the French foreign influence or anything modernist or postmodernist. Then he gets into element of domestic architecture. He talks about the triple arch. He talks about windows, doors, all that jazz. We won't be able to get to that, though. And then he critiques the architecture, and he offers an epilogue at the end. Okay, so to start off, influencing factors. There are several factors that the author discusses. I have only handpicked three that I want to kind of highlight because I think they're really interesting. The first one is geography and history. So Lebanon's on the crossroads of East and West. We've always been, that's always been the case for Lebanon, which means there's emperors, kings, rulers, pharaohs, whoever you may want that's coming through and establishing Lebanon as part of their sphere of influence. And with that, you get a lot of stuff that's basically imported. But the important thing is it's always adapted based on what works in Lebanon and what doesn't work in Lebanon. So what works in Lebanon, what doesn't work? Lebanon has two mountain ranges, as most people know. There's Mount Lebanon, and then it runs north and south, and then parallel to it, there's the anti-mountain Lebanon range. Both of those basically create environments that are difficult to build on because it's steep. It's not flat open spaces like our neighboring countries. These two mountains are also predominantly layers of sandstone and limestone, and that literally becomes the building blocks for the buildings that we'll see. The sandstone is the beautiful tan color stone that we see in most of the domestic architecture. And then finally, the socioeconomic reasons for how architecture develops in the country. So there was two groups in Lebanon. One that was commercial traders, folks who basically dwelled in the coastal towns, and then more agricultural activity with mountain dwellers who lived in the steep mountains that are difficult to get to, difficult to build in, that we'll see how that affects the architecture. So we'll start off with the first type of house, and this is the most basic type of house. He calls this the closed rectangular house. So this is a house that exists from prehistoric times. It's a square house that eventually with time starts getting larger and larger, more rooms, more space to dwell in. It's a stone foundation, so stones that they carve up, they put as a strong foundation, and then they use timber posts to basically create the walls. The walls are infilled with pebbles, loose rocks, and then are held together with a clay mortar. With time, the clay mortar becomes brick, and it becomes more and more sophisticated. The one thing that's uniquely Lebanese about this house compared to the neighboring countries is Lebanon is relatively lush compared to Palestine, Syria, and the countries neighboring us, which basically means we can build cheap roofs that are light and easy to build, whereas neighboring countries, you'll see a vaulted structure or a stone roof. The next house that the author talks about is the gallery house. And this is just a logical extension of the rectangular house. So the gallery is basically a corridor. So if you look at the drawing in the center, it's basically showing you how you have a corridor with a colonnade that connects several rooms. And there's several permutations of basically how that looks. The thing that makes the gallery house unique in Lebanon is because you're on steep mountain terrain, you can put that gallery externally as opposed to internally. So if you lived in a city where it was flat and all your neighbors were kind of facing each other, you would not want the gallery facing outside. You'd create a courtyard and you put the gallery facing inward so that your neighbors who are walking past wouldn't peep and look at you. In this case, in Lebanon, that's not the case. You can make it outside facing to look at the valley, to look at the sea. And if you look at the example on the right, the Lebanese example basically uses the first floor, the rectangular house with a vaulted ceiling, as a stable, as a kitchen. The second floor, which is the residence, has the gallery that looks out to the slope. The third type of house is called the Liwan house, or what he calls the courthouse. So the word Liwan is a Persian term that means open space. This house was imported to Lebanon. It was brought to Lebanon by the Arabs. The concept of this house is you have three sides. If you can follow my cursor on the bottom left-hand side, you have three sides that are closed and one side that's open. And they believe that this came from Bedouin architecture that basically wanted to enclose three sides, keep one side open to the wind. Again, we get to the issue with mountains in Lebanon. You don't have an open flat area to open the Liwan to, so the Lebanese flip it. Now your Liwan, the open space, is facing uphill. You puncture the back with a window, you have a view onto the valley. The fourth type of house, which is the Lebanese house par excellence, according to the author, is the central hall house. So what the central hall house basically does, in its first iteration, it keeps the bottom either a gallery house or a rectangular house, but on the second floor, it basically creates a central hall that's flanked on either side by numerous rooms. So if you can see the drawing in the center, you have rooms and you have a central hall. As it evolves, this central hall starts to translate to the outside and creates the triple arch. So you have basically a door in the center and two windows on the side. As it evolves further and further, you can create two central halls that kind of bisect each other in the center of the house. Now you have symmetry on all four sides. The very interesting about this house is this is the first time we finally start seeing the red tile roof. Again, this is possible in Lebanon because we have timber, so we can build light roofs. Basically, we don't have heavy stones on the last floor. And this is what the Lebanese house evolves. One more type that I don't have listed here that basically he discusses briefly is the combination type. So all these houses basically evolved over time, but they were added onto, they were modified, they were expanded. So you'll definitely see mutts, different variations of them all. If you're interested in learning more about architecture past the 18th and the 19th century, when there's more Ottoman influence, more French influence, you can look at the first three books that I have listed on here. These are books that talk about conservation and restoration or reconstruction of houses, predominantly in Beirut after the Civil War, but they do discuss the foreign influence on the housing. And the last book, The Houses of Lebanon, is a more updated version of the book that Friedrich put together. And that's it for me today.